It was great. Just a few weeks ago, and God's using him, and I'm very excited for what he has to give us this morning. So, John, come and teach or preach or do video or whatever you do. Just come and feel free to do whatever. Yes. Would you? Expert. I'm kind of an expert. I can do that.
You wear these all the time.
Right.
All right. See if I can get this thing to stay right here. Oh, I feel so bougie now.
All right. You kind of adjust it to your
Yeah.
flexes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You fight with this thing much?
Yes, everyone does.
Everyone does. I see everyone doing this all the time. It's like, okay, well, it's made for big ears.
What is that? I can. You can take that and put it in a pocket, or
Is it on right there?
whatever works. Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. We are excited to be with you. For the first time, we are able to be here for the entire meeting. Usually we're here for one day and then we head out. But it's been a pleasure to watch this place over. Can I put this down like this, fellas? Over the years, it's been exciting to watch this place go from where this building was when we were here, I think back in 23, to where it is now. And it's exciting to see God working here in this little town, and if you blink, you pass it. But then you stop and you see that what a work that is being done here. Is just, you are a testimony to your surrounding area, but also to others. We watch you guys. We're watching what's happening here, and I can say that for what it seems like from the outside, Brother Keith, that God's hand is in this place. And what we've experienced this week has been wonderful. Fellowship, the spirit within the people here. It's just it feels like home. Brother Woody and I were talking about that last night. It feels like home. It feels just like there's just a camaraderie and a sweet spirit among your people, and that is a spirit of unity. That's not just a handful of them, but everyone has that. And so we're excited to be here. I want to talk about that a little bit this morning, because you are growing as a church. You're expanding. You can see 3 different facilities over the course of time have been expanded, and here we are in this brand new building, and it's been dedicated. And I just find that, like I said, you have the community's attention, but you also have the devil's attention. And that is something you can't lose sight of. Because if there's one way he's going to get in here, it's going to be from within. And he's going to use certain things to change your heart and your mind, and that which you loved, you're no longer going to love. Is this what I plug into, Keith, this HDMI cord, or anybody? I'm going to use the projector. It's the only way I know how to teach is through a projector. And we're going to go through a little history. Not the history I'm used to teaching, but there will be a little history here that I want to kind of go over. But I'm going to ask first that you go to Joshua. Joshua in chapter 1. Brother Townsend was talking last night about the Canaanites, and we're going to dive a little deeper into the Canaanites. Joshua chapter 1. All right, let's see if I get this thing up and running. That's definitely not my computer. I'm not sure what to do, fellas, if I got to switch inputs or... that looks like the computer back there, yeah? What I want to talk about is, while we figure this out, is the moral necessity in a corrupt culture. One thing that's a hallmark of God's people throughout every age is that there's always a courage in every generation. We go on these history tours, which a lot of these men I'm familiar with and have met on these history tours, and they're the result. We're there to see or hear stories, and most of these stories involve a corrupt culture, but then, thank you, but then also involve courage. And I think that's the theme that I'd like to stick with. Okay, so Joshua chapter 1, if we're there, we find ourselves, obviously we're in Joshua, so Joshua has taken the mantle from Moses. And I find that especially one thing the Lord has put on my heart lately, especially is the desire to help young men as best as I can. I figure I am young. I feel very young. However, when I had met Keith in 2011, I like to tell this story because it's true. When I met Keith in 2011, he was a very kind man. Like, we were both more or less the younger fellas on the tour, and he was kind to me. And then a few years later, 10 years later, he calls me up and asks me to go on this tour and film it. And so the first words out of my dear friend's mouth, after not seeing him for 10 years, like, wow. He says, wow, you've gotten old. I thought I was still pretty young. I thought the same thing, Keith, but I didn't say anything. I'm just nice like that. But anyway, that's, the time is passing is my point in saying that. It passes quick. I felt like I'd just seen him the day before, and here's 10 years later, and I'm looking older, and so was he. And I'm looking at the men that I had watched growing up, and I'm seeing weakness, and I'm seeing frailty, and I am seeing my responsibility in that. And I'm looking at young men, and I'm seeing that we have to do our best to get these young men to understand the responsibility that they have as well. And so God has kind of directed my heart towards young men. But you find Joshua, he's getting ready to take over the reins from Moses. God has directed that. And I want to focus on a few verses here. So if you're in Joshua 1, we're going to go to verse 2. It says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise and go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that I have given unto you, as I said unto Moses, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea towards the going down of the sun shall be your coast. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so will I be with thee. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Verse 6 says, Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Only, and here's what we're going to focus on, only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to the law, that which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand nor to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book, verse 8, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then shalt thou have good success. Have not I commanded thee? For the third time he says it, Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid. Neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. And with that, I want to talk about a little bit what Joshua was up against. And I want to talk about Joshua's first mission. And what I specifically would like to dive into in this story is the story of Rahab. And I would like to get an understanding of Rahab. But Rahab is a very enticing character. Rahab the harlot, she's listed in the Hall of Faith. And we see, let's find out what we see. I want us to understand just a little bit more about Rahab, if we can. Jericho was obviously Joshua's very first mission. And there's two views, and this is just in my understanding, my small worldview. Maybe you might know more, but these two views that launched this study in me is that you have this historian aspect. I started to dive into Rahab and wanted to know more about her, and they said, well, the Bible has it wrong. She was not actually a harlot. She was an innkeeper. And So the Bible mistranslated that thing. So she was an innkeeper. And if you understand how Jericho was set up, is Jericho had the walls surrounding the city, and how it had its lodging places. Now Rahab's wasn't the only one, but it had lodging places surrounding the city in the walls. And so Rahab's was not the only one. She just happened to be one of the many innkeepers. And that's what historians will say, well, the Bible has it wrong a little bit. She's not a harlot. And then you have the other view, which is the view that I kind of grew up hearing in sermons. And that was that Rahab was a harlot. But I have heard, and I don't know, maybe some of you are familiar with this, but I also heard that Rahab was the harlot of harlots, and that she ran a brothel. Now, when I look at the scriptures, I cannot find that she ran a brothel. And when you look at the culture, what we're going to do is we're going to examine the culture of the Canaanites. We're going to examine the city specifically of Jericho. And what I'm hoping that we can do in this is propose a third view. In my mind, a third view. And that view is going to hope to marry history, the Bible, and archaeology all in one and understand who exactly Rahab is. So we're going to do that. Because if you look at the view of the historians that would say that Rahab happens to be an innkeeper. Well, there's a lot of inns, and it just so happened that these two Israelite spies happened to make their way into just her inn, so lucky Rahab. Just seems like by chance these men made their way into Rahab's lodging. If you look at it like a brothel, and this is the way I understand it, so you understand like this causes a preconceived idea of who Rahab is. So when I'm a kid, I'm growing up thinking Rahab was a harlot of harlots, man. She was the lowest of the low of Jericho. And there's something wrong with that as well, I feel. And when I look at that idea of owning the brothel, and the Israelite spies could have gone to any lodge, but instead they go to a brothel, it doesn't make sense for the character of God's people. So I want to examine that. I want to go, what is the truth? Somewhere in there's the truth. And we need to find out what that is. And so the hope is this is Bible, history, and archaeology, which is what we're going to attempt to do very shortly. Very shortly. Okay, so we're in chapter 1, so let's go to chapter 2 and verse 1. All right, in chapter 2 and verse 1, and Joshua the son of Nun sent out to Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. This is where we get the idea. The spies came to Rahab's house. And I already went through most of my slides, so I'll keep going. So I started to do a little digging, and I started to find different books written about ancient cultures, ancient biblical cultures. And here's some of the quotes that I want to share with you to help us understand Rahab and who she was. The first one comes from the book on the religion in Babylonia, Syria, and Israel. It says, tavern keepers were usually women. These inns provided alcohol, food, lodging, and in many cases, prostitution. They also served as sites of idolatry and cultic prostitution. Prostitution, the other book that I have here says in the wake of goddesses. So this is about goddesses. Prostitution in Mesopotamia was frequently located in taverns, often run by women. And the Oxford History of the Biblical World says female tavern keepers were a recognized profession. So you're starting to see there's a commonality among all these cultures. Now, these are spanning cultures. And when you start to look at what Joshua is up against, he's up against many nations, but really, when we come down to it, one culture. And this is the reason why Joshua has to start this mission. This is why God has him begin in Jericho. So we're starting to see through some of these historians, understanding this culture, we're starting to see exactly maybe a little bit of who Rahab was and what her culture was. But mainly I want to look at that first one. Tavern keepers were usually women. These inns provided alcohol, so you provided many things at this hotel, as it were. And they were alcohol, food, lodging, and in many cases, prostitution. But also, this last part's very important to how we understand Rahab. They also served as sites of idolatry and cultic prostitution. And that's what we're going to kind of springboard from. So 2 questions I have here, and we have one answer within these questions, and that is, why Rahab the harlot then, and why not Rahab the innkeeper? Second question is, why did God direct Joshua to completely decimate Jericho and other cities, killing every man, woman, and child, and even the animals? 2 questions with one answer. From what I understand, there's anywhere between 100 and 300,000 deaths in that first campaign in Jericho. And Joshua destroyed them all. So let's examine the text. This is Joshua's duty. Be strong, have courage, and do exactly as I have commanded you to do. And so we'll quickly go over some of these verses that talk about Joshua's mission. And I won't reference them, you'll see them all up there, but I want to just quickly go over some of the terminology. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. So it was, and this is skipping to the next one, you'll see the pattern here. So it was that all that fell that day. For Joshua drew not his hand back, wherewith he stretched out the spear, until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. All the souls that were therein, he let none remain. He let none remain. All the souls that were therein. All the souls that were therein. He utterly destroyed that day, and smote it with the edge of the sword. And the king thereof, he left none remaining. And they smote all the souls that were in there in that day with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe. 6:25, and Joshua, I need a glass of water. Joshua saved Rahab. Joshua saved Rahab, chapter 6 and verse 25, alive, and her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelt in Israel even unto this day. That saves to be rescued. She was rescued. When you think about that as being happenstance, just by mere luck, these guys just happened to go. Lucky Rahab that day, they went to her lodging and stayed there. But Jeremiah 1:5 gives us a little bit of insight. It says, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. Thank you, sis, much so appreciated very greatly. That is very full. And I'm going to try not to spill. And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. Another one here in 2 Timothy 1:9, who hath saved us and called us with an holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which was given us in Christ Jesus before the world began. God knew Rahab. So I want to take, through this next few minutes, I want to take a few minutes to look at the culture that Rahab was in. Okay? Jericho is thought to be, now this is from a book called Bryant G. Wood. One thing you're going to look, when you look at archaeology, history, anybody that doesn't agree with the Bible will try to discredit the Bible when they're looking at history and say, well, see, the Bible isn't really accurate. Anyway, so let's just put a pin in that for now. Jericho is thought to be the oldest continuously occupied city in the world, built the first known stone defense wall. So Jericho was a very, very old city. And Jericho was a very coveted city. So Jericho had many people taking it over, trying to establish themselves within that city because it was a very strategic, fortified position. And those walls were very important. So one of the things the archaeology shows is that there were many cultures within, or many different owners within the life of Jericho. So something to look at, and this might feel off topic, but it'll all make sense, I swear, in the end. But one of the things we look at is culture, and I want to look at our culture because we got to apply this to where we're sitting today. And when we look at our culture, especially around the political times, we can see a spiritual belief system, as it were, coming up in with red and blue, or left and right. Every culture stems from the person's, the individual, society's ideology. And those, whether they like it or not, those ideologies are stemming from their spiritual worldview. Atheism is a spiritual worldview, whether they like to admit it or not. And that spiritual worldview gives them their ideology, and that will give them the cultural conflicts. And so I would say this, is we can easily say, well, we're conservatives, and we want to align ourselves with the one position. We want to align ourselves with the red, I guess, or the conservative side. But there's also a spirituality in that side that's not good either, both left and right. So your culture, understand that your culture, your ideology, young men, will stem from the Word of God and the Word of God alone. It cannot stem from culture, your society, your those that might align themselves with your political views. So this is the same thing. Man has not changed. Throughout every generation, when Joshua was in this, it's the exact same thing. Joshua was up against a cultural war. And that cultural war came from the ideologies, which came from their spiritual worldview. And archaeology proves that to be true. So, all right. So God gave them a command in Deuteronomy 7. It says, when the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Deuteronomy 9:4 says, speak not thou in thine heart after the Lord thy God hath cast them out from before thee, saying, for my righteousness the Lord hath brought me in to possess this land. But for the wickedness of these nations the Lord doth drive them out before thee, not for thy righteousness or for thy uprightness of thine heart dost thou go to possess their land, but for the wickedness of these nations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee, and that he may perform the word which the Lord sware unto thy fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Brother Townsend, I think it was, that said last night, he said that the Canaanites were a demonic culture, and that is 100% fact. It was a society that was extremely satanic in every practice that it held. And so this is why God said, look, you cannot rip people from culture. You can, to some degree, but not in societies like this. There was a wiping the slate clean that had to happen. So, Deuteronomy 18, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abomination of those nations. There shall be found among you there shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughters to pass through the fire, or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits. Notice how everything is spiritual in nature that he's referencing right now. Now we're going to get into a little bit more about the familiar spirits aspect of that, because that's very important. Or wizards, or necromancers, for all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord thy God drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God, for these nations which thou shalt possess hearken unto observers of times and unto diviners. But as for thee, the Lord thy God hath not suffered thee to do so. Okay, so Leviticus 18:27, for all these abominations have men of the land done, which were before you, and the land defiled. I'm going to quickly list these things, and we're going to move on. These are the abominations of the Canaanites. Again, this is their spiritual worldview, which creates their ideology, which creates the culture within the city walls. And so that is idolatry. Obviously, that's going to be at the head. Divination, witchcraft, soothsaying, sorcery. Consulter with familiar spirits, and this is a very important piece to the puzzle of understanding Jericho's culture, is that familiar spirit. Necromancy, incest, adultery, he that lieth with mankind, he that lieth with beast, wearing that which pertaineth to a man, passeth his seed through the fire. From the top to the bottom, it's sexual perversion and willing to kill your children for a culture. Because the culture says it's okay. Because the culture says there is something greater. I know life is wonderful, but there's something greater, and that is your future. That is your financial well-being. But the culture has not created anything moral in and of itself. And so you have people sacrificing their children to their culture. Sound familiar? So, what was in Jericho? We'll look at the archaeology here. I'm used to my church, and I almost just stepped right off there and made a fool of myself. So, here's the problem with archaeologists, anybody that wants to say, oh, the Bible has no credit, is that, unfortunately, archaeology has proven the Bible to be true many times. And so we're going to examine some of these things. So you see, this is Jericho. I believe the way they pronounce it, and I won't try, if I find it, I'll try to pronounce it. But this is the dig site, that is Jericho. And so you'll see the walls on the outer skirts of it, and then you see at the center, you see a temple. Now this is important. At the very heart of Jericho is a temple. Archaeologist John Garstang, who excavated the site in the 1930s, said this: the walls fell outward so completely that the attackers would be able to clamber up and over the ruins into the city. The observation aligns with the biblical account of the book of Joshua, which says, in Joshua 6:20, so the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. So when they did the archaeological digs, they could see the evidence that this biblical account is actually true. The walls fell down and giving them a little bit of a slope that these guys could get up in there and take the city without any effort. And so the other archaeological find is burnt grain storage. So they said in the destruction layers, archaeologists found jars full of charred grain, suggesting a sudden destruction of the city. Quickly, it happened very, very fast. Kathleen Kenyon remarked on this discovery, the presence of large quantities of grain in the destroyed city indicate that the siege was short and the city was not starved out. And Joshua 6:24 says, and they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold and the vessels of the brass and iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. You know what else they didn't find in the archaeological digs? Silver, gold, and iron. Brass and iron. They didn't find those things, but they did find the wood, the grain that was burnt quickly. So, again, another example. The archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon also said, she's the one that led the excavation in the 1950s, described these findings as evidence of complex ritual practices. The plastered skulls represent a form of ancestor cult, which is evidence of a complex spiritual life. What they found is altars and figurines and even burial sites within the homes, within their own homes. They buried their family members underneath their floors. And by the way, I want to point something out, because I'm going to take, what you're going to find, and I'm going to say this now in case I forget it, you're going to find this, is that I'm going to go over not just the Canaanite, but you're going to go over the Babylonian cultures and multiple cultures that have the exact same patterns across the cultures. Okay, and that's important to note. So this is across many excavation sites. They found this, and it's important to look at this image, because we're going to dig into this. So what else they found in Jericho? Archaeological discoveries, particularly in Canaanite regions, have uncovered jars containing the remains of children, pointing to the horrifying reality of child sacrifice. In some cases, skulls were preserved and even plastered to reconstruct the facial features. This practice likely served as a spiritual purpose. By recreating the child's likeness, they believed they could summon and communicate with the spirit of the deceased. They drew this image of these little graves that they had. To abandon these practices wasn't just a cultural shift. It was seen as severing ties with their ancestral spirit line. This made the Canaanite religion not just evil, but inescapable for its followers. A system built on lies and spiritual bondage that clung to every layer of your family's identity. So here's what else they found. This is, this picture here. This is a child that they found in a jar that had been burnt alive. So archaeological excavations at Canaanite colonies sites have uncovered tophets, open-air sanctuaries, filled with cremated bones of infants and lambs. Carbon analysis shows that children were typically under 1 year old and had been burned on wood pyres in the open. Numerous Punic votive stelae erected over the Tophet burials, which is markers, how you put markers on our gravestones, the same thing, that's what that's referencing, bear the mark MLK. Does anybody want to take a guess at what MLK is? Molech. Inscriptions to invoke Baal Haman. One dedication reads this: to our Lord Baal Haman, because he had heard our voice, indicating a father's vow and thanks as he gave his child. Cultures can normalize anything. What we witnessed, and I'm going to stay out of politics, but what we witnessed in 2020 is cultures can absolutely normalize anything. And so it's important that your ideology, young men, comes from a spiritual grounding. So that you know where to stand, so that you know when the time comes, strength and courage will be demanded of you. And this is the time you create the man you will be. It isn't waiting. Believe me, you don't want to wait until you look and you see the men of God frail, and then you begin to stand up and try to do what's right. Do it now. Sell out to God now. Because your day's coming. And you will be the one in the seat that has to decide whether or not you're going to show strength and courage. So interesting to note is that thousands of these urns were surrounding the temple at the heart of the city. So, Deuteronomy 23, let's go to Deuteronomy 23:17 if you don't mind, just real quickly. We'll go to Deuteronomy 23. Deuteronomy 23, in verse 17, we're going to look at two things here. 23:17, there shall be no whore of the daughter of Israel, nor sodomite of the sons of Israel. Thou shalt not bring the hire of an whore or the price of a dog into the house of the Lord thy God, for any vow. For even both these are abominations unto the Lord thy God. Now that word whore means female devotee. That word sodomite means male devotee. This is a sodomite or a harlot or a whore vow. Now, John Gill says, if you like John Gill, I like John Gill, says, now this law seems to be made in opposition to the customs and practices of the Phoenicians and the Canaanites, whose land the Israelites were going to inhabit, whose women, as we are told, used to prostitute themselves in the temples of their idols and dedicate there the hire of their bodies to their gods, thinking thereby to appease their deities and obtain good things for themselves. And the like did the Babylonians and the Assyrians. The linguistic analysis of the word whore says the term is kadeshah. It derives from the word root meaning holy or set apart. Some interpretations suggest that these individuals were consecrated for religious purposes, which may have included sexual rites, fertility rites. Now, if you look at that culture, often these things would happen, your child sacrifice, these fertility rites. were there to give you success, whether it's in battle, a battle, or success in crops, to end a drought. There was things that you did toward the fertility god to have victory in those aspects. So, in regards to fertility rites, I don't think I just read this, but some scholars posit the sacred prostitution was part of fertility cults, where sexual acts were performed to ensure agricultural abundance. This practice was thought to mirror the divine union of deities and Baal and Asherah, like Baal and Asherah. You think about this. Well, we'll maybe come back to it. Let's skip that. Another historian that I found, and this is where I think we can understand exactly who Rahab was, and it's imperative that we do. There was an ancient historian, Herodotus, and he wrote this, speaking of the heathen culture. He says, every woman born in the country must once in her life go and sit down in the precinct of Venus, and there consort with a stranger, a woman who has once taken her seat is not allowed to return home till one of the strangers throws a silver coin into her lap and takes her with him beyond the holy ground. The woman goes with the first man who throws her money and rejects no one. When she has gone with him and so satisfied the goddess, she returns home, and from that time forth no gift, however great, will prevail with her. So this is speaking of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Ishtar, the Babylonian. So something to consider here is that when you look at these cultures, a lot of them come from this, a lot of these cultures are identical in nature. And they might have a language barrier between the two, but you see, this is to Ishtar. And then you have also in the Canaanite culture, Astarte. And so there's one God, two different names is what they're finding in these cultures. These cultures are intermarrying. How can you intermarry with a culture outside of your own ideology? You can't. All of their ideology is the same. And so what Herodotus notes is that they would offer their daughters to go up to the temple, which we saw on that slide at the center of the city. You could offer your daughters to go up to the temple, and then there they would give of themselves to a perverted man with a sick and twisted mind that would flip her the first coin, and she couldn't deny him, but she had to go with him beyond the holy ground where he could do his due diligence. And then you wonder why thousands of children's urns are found underneath the temple. You can normalize anything. Because these regions traded, warred, and intermarried, their gods evolved together. So when Herodotus talks about Ishtar, Melita, in Babylon, and the Bible speaks of Astarte, an Asherah, or Baal, we're looking at the same religious system expressed in different dialects, cities, and customs. Even though Herodotus wasn't directly speaking about the Canaanites, his descriptions illuminate the broader Near Eastern world that shaped Canaanite religion, including the deep integration of sexual worship, sacrifice, and spiritual belief. Okay, enough with that. Historical evidence indicates that some families dedicated their daughters to the temple service as an alternative to child sacrifice. This practice was viewed as a way to spare their child's life while still offering her in devotion to the gods. What would you do, Dad, in a culture like this? What would you do? You wonder why God says, Joshua, be strong. Be courageous. Rahab, if you look at closely, you'll see that Rahab was shaped by her culture. So this is the difference. As you look at these cultures and you see how they are shaped and you see what their practices are, and you look at Rahab, the harlot, and you start to wonder, who was Rahab? Who exactly was Rahab? That 300,000 people would die, and yet she would be spared. She the harlot of harlots? She the lowest of the low? Not that I can tell. but I can see a society around her, a culture around her. So, okay. So let's, with that in mind, I want to take that, all that we've just learned, what I went over, I want to kind of go over Joshua chapter 2. Let's go back over, if you can, to Joshua chapter 2. And with that, we'll read the story of Rahab, maybe just a little differently. And Joshua the son of Nun sent out to Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, "Go view the land, even Jericho." And they went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men and that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they come to search out all the country." Verse 4 says, "And the woman took the 2 men and hid them and said thus, There came men unto me," going back to the king, "there came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them." Verse 6 says, "But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords, and as they were gone out, they shut the gate. And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. And she said unto the men, I know." She said, "I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God, in heaven above and in earth beneath." How does Rahab come to this conclusion? When you examine the culture of the Canaanites and you see a young lady who has witnessed, and likely she's alive, and you look at the way they would sacrifice their children, and in order to save your children, you could send them up to the temple for service. Much of it was through whoredom and sodomy. And when you look at that and they say, "Well, come with me beyond the holy ground and I'll take you back here, and this is what is holy. This is what is true, and this is what is good." And Rahab, at this point in her life, something fired. And I don't believe it was just here. I think God was working on her heart before this. And she sees all this culture around her, and she witnesses it, and she says, "This isn't what's right. This isn't what is true. There has to be something greater." And then there's a testimony that follows the Israelites of a God that is true and is powerful. When I say protect your testimony, protect your testimony. So, verse 12 here. "Now therefore I pray thee, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token." Give me a true token. I just want something true. Culture out there, it might look wicked, but there are people out there that just want something true. They want light. Many people love darkness. Yes, your culture, much of your culture loves darkness, but there are people out there that are tired of it. And they're looking for something true. And that's where what we find Rahab in this scenario is something, I want a true token. And I believe your God, He is God. How do I know that? Because I've watched your testimony. I've seen God working in your life. Verse 13, "And that ye will save alive my father and my mother, and my brethren and my sisters, what a heart. And all they that have, and deliver our lives from death. And then men answered her, our lives for yours. And if ye utter not this our business, and it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. When you consider Rahab's past, and you think, well, if that is the case, it means Rahab was returning that favor to save her father's house. She could have been another sacrifice. And Rahab in her life, when you look at the culture of that, and you think about all that Rahab had seen, all the friends that she had probably and likely lost, all the children she had seen sacrificed, and she looks at Daddy, and Daddy tried his best in the culture to save her life. And she looks at them and says, save my dad. Save my mom and my siblings. Protect your testimony with every fiber of your being. You are living examples. You realize that. Amen. You are sometimes in some people's lives the only light that they have. I'm going to try to tie this in here, Keith, because I know you're going for dedication. And I think I did good on my time, so I'll wrap it with this. If I can find this. When the Holy Spirit, when God fills the temple after Solomon places the Ark of the Covenant inside, one of the words I thought was pretty powerful. I have bookmarks and these to save the spots. The Holy Spirit, God himself, fills the temple in a cloud, and so Solomon is there, and he begins to pray and dedicate the temple. And one thing I want to point out here, it says, and if there be in the land famine, there be pestilence, blastings, mildew, locusts, or if there be caterpillar, this is destruction. If there be an enemy, besiege them in the land, or their cities. If you're wondering, this is 1 Kings 8:37. In the land their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, what prayer and supplication soever be made by any man, or by all thy people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart, and spread forth his hands towards this house. That every man, you're in a culture, people know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, whether they call themselves atheists or not, every man knows the plague of his heart and knows that there's something greater. A few weeks ago, I sat with a dying man who was lost as a dog in the woods. And he said, I know there's something out there. I know that there's something out there. And society knows these things. But Solomon's prayer was that those people that know the plague of their own heart would look towards this house and reach their hands towards it. You know, it does look bleak sometimes. You look like you're by yourself, but there are people that are searching for that light. Everything that we do, when you look at Rahab as the great-great or great-great-grandmother of David, everything we do is to prepare the way for the king. God knew Rahab, and she was rescued. She was rescued. I don't believe that Rahab was the lowest of the low. I believe that there was a seed of faith in Rahab, and she saw darkness long enough and wanted light. Amen. We're still here. God's not here. Jesus has not returned yet. We're still here. People want light. It's up to us to hold that standard. All right, Brother Keith, I'll end with that.